joined today by
J.R. Romano.
Hey, everybody. J.R. Romano here. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you are listening, please subscribe. Today in the state of Connecticut, lots going on. We're going to be joined by Ed Ford a little bit later to talk about his experience going down to the White House during African American History Month. He had an interesting experience with George Logan, Connecticut Republican's first African American state senator. Very proud. He represents my hometown. But first and foremost, I think what we're going to talk about, or at least open up with, a brilliant idea by former candidate Tim Herbst. Tim wrote an op-ed. We actually put a petition out, and we're pushing the idea for a forensic audit of the transportation fund. I think that is a great idea. I think that if we as a state and we as hardworking family members are going to be asked and demanded to pay more, the least, and I mean the least, Ned Lamont and the Connecticut Democrats could do is an audit. Simply make sure that they're spending the money wisely. Tim has a particular brand of politics that I'm certain that this will be discussed, but I think it's worth being discussed. These are the types of things that the state should be doing. Find ways to save money. Because at the end of the day, when we're talking higher tolls, taxes, I think Avery Soda did this funny soda labels that say, "Don't tax me, Ned." Because this state is essentially in a death spiral. David Stemmerman has talked about it. Bob Stefanowski's talking about Brown. All of our gubernatorial candidates talked about this death spiral. And Ned Lamont is not doing anything to take us out of it. It's just demanding more of our money. So I think this forensic audit, specifically the transportation fund, because it has to do with the tolling that Ned is asking for. And frankly, what I find so ironic is, when Republicans were telling him that he wasn't going to be able to do the trucks only, he scoffed. And he said, well, Rhode Island's doing it. And lo and behold, whether through pure ignorance or unwilling to accept reality, Ned now has changed and said he's going to be tolling everybody. So this audit of the Special Transportation Fund, I think, is a good idea, and I think the state should do it. And I think this is something that both Democrats and Republicans could get on board with. But we'll see how far the Progressive Caucus goes with it. Because even if they find extra money, they're just going to want it for their pet projects anyway. And speaking of the Progressive Caucus, one of the things that I find so frustrating, and I've had multiple conversations with TV media about how they ignore bad behavior, and I mean bad behavior by elected Democrat officials. And they always use the excuses that they're busy, that the senator doesn't, or the state rep doesn't represent their news coverage. But I can tell you, when it's a Republican, they show up. We've had elected Democrats who have demanded that we defund ICE. No coverage. Recently, though, this is my favorite. Jason Rojas, who's a state rep, he said in a tweet, he said, here's an idea. Every town that passes an anti-toll resolution gets their town aid, road, LOCIP, and other aid for infrastructure eliminated. Cool? So basically what Jason Rojas is saying is that if you don't agree with us, Democrat politicians, we are going to cut your funding. And by the way, now I have to give the print media some credit, because they in fact did cover it. They have also been holding the Greenwich senator, the Democrat down there, who has made blunder after blunder, making comments about how hiring private staff to work in a office that she pays for, very Clinton-esque, right? That the staff member, because she's personally paying for it, should not be subject to FOI. There's all these ethics questions, and her comment to the paper was, "It's my money. You have it's none of your business." Again, no TV coverage on that. There was no TV coverage on this tweet from Jason Rojas. Oh, and by the way, that Alex Bernstein retweeted, saying it's a great idea. You want funds to fix your roads and parking problems, then be a part of the solution. Let's get Connecticut back on track. Kind of self-congratulating each other on what a great idea that we should punish towns and people who do not agree with us. This is the modern Democratic Party, and the media ignores them. over and over and over again. Sorry, I'm pounding on the desk. It's so frustrating because I get asked questions about people who aren't even elected officials anymore. I get questions about people on my state central committee. I get asked questions about former elected officials. I get asked questions about former chairmen. But meanwhile, we have an entire body of elected officials that TV media ignores with their bad behavior. It's ridiculous. Not a single camera was put in front of either of these two elected officials with these boneheaded comments. It's poppycock, I tell you. It's poppycock. Being a Republican in the state of Connecticut. Oh, man. So I cannot tell you how almost disappointing it is sometimes to talk to some of the people in the media when it comes to this stuff. Because it's hard not to feel like you're not getting a fair shake. And oftentimes it's not the reporter's fault. It's their editorial boards or their editor bosses who want to deem what is newsworthy and what's not. Jokingly, I think I said once to a TV reporter when they showed up about something, it was like, what's the matter? No cats in the tree tonight? No snowstorms to give triple coverage to while you ignore elected officials insulting the entire state. So it does. The only thing that I can say and hope is for the people listening to this to understand that we have municipal elections coming up, and we're going to need everyone to work their tail off in order to make sure that Republicans keep control of the municipalities we have and take control of some towns that aren't being run well. Because if something that we've learned very quickly is that the Democrats that are now in charge of the state of Connecticut have no idea how to lead, and they have no idea actually how to solve these problems. I got asked that question. For many families in this state who thought that they were, quote unquote, punishing Republicans because of federal issues, got a sobering reality when all these taxes are being proposed, forced regionalization is being proposed, tolls are being proposed, no end in sight. We are for those that don't know, the state of Connecticut is the second most taxed state for state and local taxes in the country. And that's according to data from 2014. I bet by now we're number one. We are probably, and who knows, but I would say either still second, if not first, in regards to the amount of state and local taxes we pay. When you add in higher minimum wage, and I've talked about these things, it's just so frustrating. And actually, it's one of the reasons why I think we picked up 2 seats. We won 2 legislative races that were in special election from communities that were blue collar communities. The thing that makes me laugh, I shouldn't say laugh, I should say proud, is that the 2 seats that we picked up are the people that will be most impacted by higher property taxes, by tolls, higher taxes of any kind, in fact. People who understand what it means to balance their home budget. Those are the ones that voted for the Republican in these specials. The people that live and understand that you don't spend more than you have, that every dime and dollar counts. At the end of the month, having a little extra means so much. The communities that the Democrats won, and it's not meant disrespectful, but it's Farmington, it's West Hartford, it's these wealthier communities that aren't feeling the burden yet. They have yet to feel the burden of how damaging Democrat policies are going to be to their family. And it'll be real damage. So, I know that it's a lot of doom and gloom. Fortunately, right now, what I will tell you is that I think what's happening is that the Senate and the House caucuses for the Democrats, the elected officials, whether it's a state rep or a state senator, are playing a little bit good cop, bad cop with Ned Lamont. I think Ned Lamont is like the good cop, right? So a progressive socialist senator from New Haven, Martin Looney, suggests forced regionalization. So then, Ned Lamont goes to Wilton, Connecticut and says, don't worry, I'm not for forced regionalization. We'll talk about it. We want to incentivize communities. So what they do is they have this hardline socialist propose something. And then Ned comes along and offers this kind of softer side. But trust me when I tell you, it's the same coin. There may be 2 sides, but it's the same coin. They are ultimately going to force us to regionalize. They are going to push tolls down our throat. Don't buy the good guy, the good cop, bad cop thing. Don't buy it. So anytime you hear someone say, well, I really think Ned's trying, I think it's an act. I legitimately think it's a game they're playing for a public perception standpoint that, Martin Looney or one of these state reps carve a hard line out that's pretty far out there. Actually, I think this is a part of, if you read The Art of the Deal, they talk about this. You put out something that you're never going to accomplish. And then Ned comes along and seems reasonable. He seems like the good cop. So we have to be very careful and be and pay a lot of attention to what's really going on. So I know that, I'm going to bring on Ed Ford. I know that he's up at the Capitol today, where there was a lot of discussion and a lot of testimony about the forced school regionalization. And I'm going to talk to him a little bit about that. But first, I want to talk to him about his experience at the White House, what it was like, and what it meant for him to be there during African American History Month. All right, joining me now is Mr. Ed Ford. Now, Ed, I wanted to bring you on because you had the distinction and honor to visit the White House last week. And correct me if I'm wrong, you are on, it's not the Board of Education. Are you on the Board of Finance?
It is the Board of Education in Middletown.
It is the Board of Education. Okay, so you're on the Board of Education in Middletown. And why were you honored and invited to the White House?
Well, it was last month was Black History Month, and they had this National African History Month reception. And, it was to my surprise that, that we got these emails a couple of weeks out from the event. It's not something that I didn't even know was coming. It wasn't even on my radar, but it's always an honor to get an invitation such as this, especially to a place like the White House. I mean, that's phenomenal. That's like a once in a lifetime thing for a lot of people. So for me, I was definitely shocked but honored at the same time, and incredibly grateful to be able to step foot in that building and have that reception, especially in honor of Black history, which is American history. It's very rich, and a lot of the contributions that we as a people have made to this country should definitely be honored every day and recognized every day. So that was an honor for me to be able to be there.
Well, actually, I've had the fortunate experience of being invited to the White House for a Christmas party because I serve on the Republican National Committee. But I'm curious. There was always all these little nuances and little things. So what was the thing that surprised you most about going into the White House? The security measures? Was it just something something? Because I found all these little cool details of history just in the building when you're walking in.
Yeah, and for me, I'm really a history nerd, JR, to tell you the truth. So I was just in there amazed at looking at all the different books, all the different paintings and fine china. And when I first walked in, I got the chance to see all of these portraits of these first ladies and presidents. And it was just like, wow, it was very surreal. We walked into the library room of the White House, which had books from the 1800s, the 1700s. And it was just like all of this history is in this room, and I'm amongst it and able to really just take in that moment for me. It was amazing. It was an honor of a lifetime, really. And I hope one day I'll be able to get the chance to go back and read a few of those books. But it was definitely something that if you love history, the White House is a place that one day you want to visit because it's a beautiful piece of American history all throughout that building. Has amazing pieces of history.
Well, what was the most surprise? I mean, obviously, I would agree. I mean, my mother was a history teacher. I love history. I loved all that stuff about being in the White House. But what was something that kind of surprised you that you weren't expecting?
To be honest with you, I wasn't expecting there to be a live orchestra. But
he knows how to throw a party. I mean, that you got to say that about the guy.
Yeah, that was definitely a cool portion, being able to walk up the stairs. And you see this just beautiful orchestra. I mean, cellos and violinists, and they were really they played beautiful the whole entire time. And that to me was a shock, but was cool to see. I'm definitely another fan of music, another thing that I love as well, along with history. So I was really just in a good place, man. It was just being able to meet and network with so many people from across the country. Well,
that was actually the next. That was actually the next thing I wanted to ask. What was, I guess it was twofold. I don't know if the president gave a speech or not, but I'm curious in what what he said, your takeaway from what he said, but also what was the attitude and perspective of the room? You know, one of the things that as Republicans often talk about and how we, I guess, appeal or talk to a minority group. And I will be the first to admit we have a lot of Republicans that are very bad at communicating with how, fighting for freedom and fighting for economic liberty lifts all people up, right? Doesn't matter what race, what color, what religion, strong economic policies makes everybody's life better. So I'm curious in what was happening in the room. What were the discussions? Because one of the things we do know is that Donald Trump has actually been able to get a lot of support from young African Americans that I think has surprised a lot of people.
Yeah, so you bring up some interesting points, some points that I'm excited to talk about, and that I'll even be talking about next Thursday, less than a week now, with Nancy Johnson at
great congresswoman from Connecticut.
Yes, Bristol RTC event that we're going to be speaking at. The takeaway for me in that room and event was meeting a lot of young Black conservatives from across the country, whether it was from Ohio or California, people who really just have, maybe a different perspective in the political realm and haven't always been accepted, so for having that perspective, that difference of opinion on certain issues. And for me, it's good to see and to have African Americans in the Republican Party. Because to be completely honest with you, JR, all of us, well, not all of us, but the majority of us have been affiliated with Democrats for a long time. And that hasn't really gotten us further along the road. We have no political leverage. We're all in one camp. And so
it's expected.
It's expected. Right. It's expected of us. We're all in one camp. And it's like, when we're demanding things and we're asking for things and we're trying to get things done, it's almost like, we're being taken for granted. And, our vote is just going to be automatic. So we're just going to take you for granted and do what it is that we're going to carry out. And that shouldn't be the case. So we need political leverage. So we need to have people in both parties to be able to come to the table and work together and collaborate to create solutions for all. And that's what it was encouraging for me to see, that there's more and more African Americans are entering the party, Tyrell and myself, but others across the country who are willing to step up to the plate and say, we're going to be pioneers. We're going to be people who are going to work within this party for our communities, but all people as well, all Americans, for the economic benefit of the country, and working with the Democrats and people from different political perspectives. And I think that really gives our community, as the African American community, more leverage in the political sphere.
Well, I also think there's something to be said about the fact that for so many years, African American Democrats have had what I'll say is this political class within urban communities and inner cities that they maintain power through the political class, but what ends up happening is the policies don't in fact help anybody, right? And you see that over and over again when you see these failing cities that have had Democrat control for 30, 40, 50 years. Why is it they're all failing, right? And then you think, well, okay, the residents in this community are also not being provided quality education, infrastructure issues. But as long as we have, and Hartford is a prime example, they have all of if you were to go to that city hall, you would think that this was Washington, D.C. They have all these positions and all these great titles, and their taxation levels are through the roof in Hartford, and you would think that their community is getting all these wonderful services. But they're not, right? The quality of education is not great. I think one of the things that has always been frustrating for me, I grew up in Derby, Connecticut, which is a very diverse community, but this state in particular put a young, single African-American mother in jail for stealing an education. She was charged with grand larceny, and not a single Democrat, no one came to her defense, not even after the fact, to say we need to change the law so this never happens again. Because if there is a community that desperately wants to get out of a failing situation and being forced to go to a school district that's failing, would be African Americans, Hispanic Americans who recognize that maybe the neighborhood they're in isn't providing the best quality education. So they're going to try to find ways to improve their lives. And what did Democrats in this state do? Put you in jail. And people think that I make that up. That is a real story. And I don't think Republicans do a good enough job explaining how we believe education is the path to prosperity. We want to invest in people And I just wish that we had a bigger platform or a better opportunity to speak to many in the African American community on this basis of we actually do care. And I do always appreciate, and Ed, I know I met you 2 or 3 years ago, and I've always appreciated your insight. Now, my next question to you, and I know it was great going to the White House, and I'm sure that was a wonderful thing to experience. But then you had to come home. And correct me if I'm wrong, you were at the Capitol Friday.
Mm-hmm.
What
Today, yep.
happened? Yeah, what happened today in that building? So,
yes, you're correct. I just left the Capitol. I was at a hearing for the school regionalization bill. And to be honest with you, I really don't have a fixed opinion as of yet because I'm still learning about the bill. But I went in there with an open mind to try to figure out both sides of the perspectives that are being offered up. I saw a lot of families, a lot of children and kids come forward who were really upset. And really were not happy with how this bill would affect homeschooling. There was a large amount of families that came out that talked about the perspective of how this would affect homeschooling, and a lot of kids from different towns who came out and said that they were opposed to this bill for whatever reasons that they had, and it just gave me a different perspective of what I've been hearing so far in the news. You don't really get to hear individual people's and families' perspectives until you come to the forefront to an event like this and really listen to what they have to say.
Well, I think the hardest part about and I keep using the term forced regionalization, and it doesn't matter the means, right? So, we won't provide you with bonding services if you don't regionalize. However you want to describe the forced regionalization. I think the fundamental problem that I have with what they're trying to do is I think it takes the right away of a local community to have a school district, right? So this is where I have a problem in the fact that, let's take where I'm from. Derby and Ansonia are currently studying whether or not they want to be a regional school district. And that's great if that's what they decide they want to do, right? I think the problem is when the state comes in and starts to mandate and saying, we're going to control this. We're going to take your right away to have a local school district. That's where it gets a little worrisome to me. And when you talk about the idea of that, we're going to incentivize towns to regionalize. To me, that's just, again, that's forcing it. So, and where this is all stemming from is the fact that Hartford politicians have failed. Not these local school districts. And that's where they're not examining the policies that have created the mess. They're simply making the mess bigger, right? So, I understand your point about not having and I know you're on the Board of Ed. I'm not asking you to take a position, but I think you've seen in mass today and around the state 2 big issues that have galvanized people, which is the forced regionalization and the tolling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know you're being from Middletown. A single mom who lives in Middletown and who drives to Hartford for work, it's going to cost, in tolls alone, just to drive to work, it's going to cost her about $1,000 to $1,500 a year to drive to work.
Yeah. And that's basically an additional tax, on the middle class, really, who's going to be paying for those tolls, going through the state, going on their morning commute to work, picking up the kids after school. That's something that I feel like we need to definitely consider very carefully before making any, just decisions automatically without really looking at all of the factors. Is if this is going to really benefit Connecticut and the middle class in Connecticut, or is this going to really end up hurting and damaging the middle class in Connecticut? I mean, you've seen all of these additional tax proposals as well. In the end, does a grocery tax and medicine tax really help the middle class? No. So you have to look at everything in totality and really consider what are the things that we can do that's going to help us in our fiscal crisis, but not damage and hurt the middle class at the same time while doing that.
Yeah, I think the problem is that there's a lot of people in that building that have been there a long time. One of which, Martin Looney, who's a state senator from New Haven. They don't want to look honestly at their failures. They're not going to take responsibility for the path and the decisions they made to put us in this position. And so instead of cutting or finding another path, it's simply let's tax more things. And, we've been saying this over and over again to your point about, the middle class. And frankly, what no one understands about 2018 is the middle class communities voted in stronger numbers than the Democrats in particular want to admit. Even in I think it's New Haven, Bob Stefanowski did 2% better with turnout, up 25% in a Democrat city, still did 2% better by percentage than Tom Foley. Which means even in New Haven, the Republican message, sure, we wish it could have been 10%. But in New Haven, which is a quote-unquote inner city, Bob did better than 4 years ago. And where we're losing ground, to your point, Ed, is that wealthier people are now the Democrat voters who can afford the tolls, who don't mind paying more. And then what will end up happening is when they get bored of Connecticut, they're going to move out. But who can't afford to move? You and I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's the greatest tragedy of what's happening in the state right now.
Yeah. No, I agree. We need solutions, but we need to be able to have common sense solutions that's really going to help the average everyday person. And this is my thing about our party. I think we're in a peculiar position right now because though we may have taken a hit in November, I think that we still have the ability to really show folks, we're here to provide solutions for this state. We're here to help the middle class. We're here to help all communities and uplift all communities. So give us a chance, next November, 2020 and beyond, because, we really want to see this state thrive and not see a mass exodus because of the overbearing taxation and regulation that has been proposed and tried to be implemented upon the people of the state. So.
Well, listen, Ed, I really appreciate you coming on. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience in the White House. I think that's so cool. I'm proud to have you as a Republican, representing our banner, and keep up the good work. It's always great as a party chairman when I get to point to leaders throughout the community that are trying to make the towns they live in and the communities that they represent better. So I really appreciate all you're doing in Middletown, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, JR. Thank you.